What if tanks, those iron behemoths destined to revolutionize warfare, rumbled onto the Western Front a full year earlier, in the muddy hell of 1915 rather than 1916? As British engineers accelerate development amid the carnage of Neuve Chapelle and Champagne, hundreds of Mark I prototypes shatter German lines before the Somme slaughter. No more futile infantry charges into machine gun fire. Instead, a mechanized breakthrough unleashes butterfly effects that shorten the Great War, rewrite alliances, and propel the world into an era of armored dominance. Strap in for this explosive alternate timeline where steel beasts conquer the trenches, and forever alter humanity's path. As steel beasts conquer the trenches, and forever alter humanity's path, the butterfly effects begin with a daring acceleration of Britain's most secretive weapon program. In our timeline, tank development crawled through bureaucratic delays and technical setbacks. Winston Churchill's Landships Committee, formed in February 1915, struggled with unreliable American tracks on the prototype, Little Willie, completed only in September. The superior rhomboidal, Mother, followed in January 1916, with operational Mark I tanks not ready until the Somme in September. Mass deployment came too late to prevent years of attrition. Here, urgency overrides caution. The horrors of early 1915 offensives, Neuve Chapelle and March, where British and Indian troops gained fleeting ground only to be slaughtered by uncut wire and machine guns, the Second Battle of Ypres in April, with chlorine gas choking Allied lines, forced Churchill and the War Office to pour resources into the project. Engineers William Tritton and Walter Wilson receive unlimited priority for steel, engines, and labor. By skipping exhaustive trials on flawed designs, they refine Little Willie rapidly and leap to rhomboidal hulls by summer. Factories in Lincoln, Birmingham, and Glasgow tool up early, producing 200 improved Mark I equivalents, armed with 6-pounder guns in sponsons and thicker armor, by December 1915. The point of divergence crystallizes at the Battle of Neuve Chapelle Redux. In March 1915, General Haig's First Army attacks again, but this time 150 tanks support the four-corps assault. On March 10, under a thunderous barrage, the iron monsters emerge from concealed assembly points near Armentières. Crews in stifling, petrol-fumed interiors grind forward at 4 miles per hour, crushing barbed wire entanglements that halted the historical advance. German machine gunners, stunned by the sight of these devil's coaches, pour fire harmlessly off sloped plates. Tanks overrun forward trenches, their sponsons enfilading defenders while infantry follows in their wake. By noon, Neuve Chapelle falls completely. German reserves counterattack but falter against coordinated tank infantry teams. Within days, the breakthrough widens to 10 miles, exploiting toward Lille before Falkenhayn rushes divisions from the east. Casualties plummet, British losses drop below 4,000 versus the historical 11,000, while German prisoners swell to 15,000. The immediate aftermath reshapes the Western Front. French commander Joffre, emboldened by British success, launches supporting attacks in Champagne, stretching German reserves thin. By summer, tanks, now numbering 500, enable rolling offensives that push the line back 30 miles, capturing Lille and threatening the Douai rail hub. Germany abandons the Ypres salient to shorten defenses. Poison gas, debuted historically at Ypres, sees limited use as open warfare resumes briefly. On the Eastern Front, the knock-on effects prove decisive. With fewer troops transferred west, Russian steamroller offensives in Galicia falter earlier, but German attention remains divided. Austria-Hungary, spared total collapse at Gorlice-Darno, holds longer, yet the overall Central Powers strain under sustained pressure. Britain's empire rallies. Colonial contributions surge, Canadian and Anzac divisions arrive faster, inspired by mechanized victory. U.S. neutrality holds, but American factories supply tank components under lucrative contracts. The war shortens dramatically, no Verdun meat grinder, no Somme bloodbath. As 1915 ends, the Allies stand poised for deeper breakthroughs, their armored spearhead rewriting tactics overnight and sparing millions from the abyss of prolonged stalemate. As 1915 ends, the Allies stand poised for deeper breakthroughs, their armored spearhead rewriting tactics overnight and sparing millions from the abyss of prolonged stalemate. The year 1916 dawns with a transformed Western Front. British tank production ramps to 1,200 vehicles by mid-year, Mark II and III variants with improved Holt tracks, hotter running engines, and unditching beams for crossing trenches. French industry, prodded by Joffre and now fully invested, begins licensed production of the Schneider CA-1 earlier than historically, deploying 400 by autumn. Coordinated Anglo-French offensives roll forward in waves. The Battle of Arras in April sees 800 tanks spearhead a 20-mile advance, capturing Cambrai and threatening Valenciennes. German defenses, still reliant on static lines and horse-drawn logistics, crumble under concentrated armored assaults. Falkenhayn's strategy of bleeding France white at Verdun never materializes. Instead, Crown Prince Wilhelm's Fifth Army is pulled northward, abandoning the historic fortress without a fight. Germany responds desperately. Hindenburg and Ludendorff, elevated early to supreme command, prioritize anti-tank measures, wider trenches, field guns in direct fire roles, and prototype A-7V tanks rushed into limited production, only 50 by late 1916. Yet the Central Powers lack the industrial base and raw materials to match Allied output. On the Eastern Front, the accelerated Western success frees Russian armies from defensive postures. Brusilov's offensive in June strikes with greater force, shattering Austria-Hungary's lines in Galicia and capturing Lemberg. Without the historical Somme drain, Britain sustains pressure, while French morale, bolstered by recaptured territory, soars. The decisive shift comes in autumn 1916. A combined Allied push toward the Belgian coast, codenamed Operation Iron Tide, deploys 1,500 tanks across a 40-mile front from Ypres to Lens. German armies, exhausted and outmaneuvered, retreat in disorder. By November, the entire Belgian coastline falls, severing U-boat bases and reopening maritime supply lines. Submarine warfare loses its sting, American loans flow freely, and neutral shipping resumes. Italy, sensing victory, declares war earlier and with greater commitment, tying down Austrian forces in the Alps. Austria-Hungary fractures under the strain. Ethnic unrest explodes in Czech and South Slav lands. Emperor Franz Joseph, dying in November 1916 as historically, leaves a weakened Charles I facing mutinies. Romania joins the Entente in August, its oil fields secured by rapid Allied advances. The Ottoman Empire, deprived of German support, sues for separate peace after losing Baghdad to a reinforced Mesopotamian campaign. Germany's final gamble fails. Ludendorff's 1917 Hindenburg Line, retreat buys time but cannot stem the armored tide. Spring offensives in 1917, now featuring 3,000 Allied tanks, pierced the Siegfriedstellung near Street Quinton. German armies, demoralized by unbroken defeats, suffer mass surrenders. Mutinies spread in a fleet at Kiel, socialist councils form in Berlin and Munich. Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates in June 1917, fleeing to neutral Holland. An armistice is signed on July 11, 1917, exactly 3 years after the July crisis, but with the Central Powers utterly defeated. The Great War ends not in exhaustion, but in decisive Allied victory after 35 months. Casualties total perhaps 6 million rather than 20 million. Europe avoids the demographic hemorrhage that scarred a generation. Yet the mechanized triumph accelerates an arms race in armored warfare, as nations scramble to master the weapon that ended the war to end all wars, and unknowingly prepare for conflicts of even greater mobility and destruction. Nations scramble to master the weapon that ended the war to end all wars, and unknowingly prepare for conflicts of even greater mobility and destruction. The 1920s and 1930s unfold in the shadow of armored supremacy, a world reshaped by decisive victory rather than exhausted stalemate. The Treaty of Brussels in 1918 imposes moderate terms. Germany cedes Alsace-Lorraine, parts of Posen, and Schleswig, but retains most pre-war borders and pays reparations over decades rather than punitive sums. No Weimar fragility emerges. The Kaiserreich transitions to constitutional monarchy under Wilhelm III, with the Reichstag gaining real power. France recovers territory but harbors no burning revanchism, its population spared the worst losses, its economy buoyed by early peace. Politically, extremism withers. Without the stab-in-the-back myth or hyperinflation, nationalist radicals like Hitler remain fringe figures, the NSDAP never forms. In Russia, the Bolsheviks, deprived of wartime collapse, failed to seize power in 1917. Kerensky's provisional government stabilizes with Allied loans and grain from recaptured Ukraine, evolving into a fragile republic by 1922. Lenin dies in exile, Trotsky fades into obscurity. A constitutional Russia, agrarian yet industrializing, aligns loosely with France and Britain. Socially, the demographic dividend proves profound. Europe avoids losing an entire generation, birth rates rebound earlier, swelling populations by millions. Women's wartime roles expand moderately, factory work on tank assembly lines accelerates suffrage, Britain enfranchises all women in 1920, France in 1924. Yet traditional structures endure longer without total societal upheaval. Anti-Semitism simmers in Eastern Europe but lacks the explosive catalysts of defeat and economic ruin. Pogroms continue sporadically, but no state-sponsored genocide materializes. Colonial empires, unweakened by debt and manpower drain, tighten control. Britain crushes Indian independence movements with reform tactics, granting limited council reforms while retaining imperial unity. France integrates Algeria more fully, investing tank-derived engineering in Saharan infrastructure. Decolonization delays by decades, Gandhi's Satyagraha fizzles against undivided British resolve, Ho Chi Minh remains a Paris pastry chef. Technologically, the early tank triumph ignites a mechanized revolution. Interwar armies prioritize armored forces. Britain develops the Vickers medium series into sophisticated cruisers by 1925, France fields thousands of Renault successors, even cash-strapped Russia licenses Christie suspension designs from America. Doctrine evolves rapidly, Fuller and Liddell Hart's theories dominate staff colleges, emphasizing deep battle and combined arms. Aviation, spared wartime urgency, advances commercially. Transatlantic passenger routes begin in 1928 via giant flying boats. Yet military aircraft lag, no strategic bombing cult emerges. Economically, the shorter war leaves global finance intact. Wall Street booms without U.S. belligerence. The 1929 crash is milder, contained by robust European demand for American tractors and automobiles, offshoots of tank technology. Jazz Age prosperity extends deeper into the 1930s. Art Deco skyscrapers rise from Warsaw to Los Angeles, cultural exchange flourishes unscarred by cynicism. By the late 1930s, tensions mount along new fault lines. Japan's continental ambitions clash with a stronger Russian Republic in Manchuria, skirmishes escalate into the Sino-Russian War of 1937 to 1940, where mass T-26 tanks duel Japanese light armor across frozen plains. In Europe, a resurgent Germany, industrial giant but diplomatically cautious, eyes Slavic borders. France and Britain, bound by Entente Cordiale, maintain armored superiority through quantitative edge. The world balances on mobile warfare's knife edge, doctrines perfected, machines refined, but the human cost of 1915 to 1917 remembered as tragedy averted, setting the stage for a future conflict of lightning maneuvers rather than static slaughter, one that will test whether tanks truly made war obsolete, or merely more catastrophically efficient. The world balances on mobile warfare's knife edge, doctrines perfected, machines refined, but the human cost of 1915 to 1917 remembered as tragedy averted, setting the stage for a future conflict of lightning maneuvers rather than static slaughter, one that will test whether tanks truly made war obsolete, or merely more catastrophically efficient. That test arrives in 1942, ignited by Japan's invasion of a still colonial Southeast Asia and Russia's determination to reclaim lost prestige in Manchuria. The Pacific-European War erupts when Tokyo strikes British Malaya and Dutch Indonesia simultaneously with Moscow's armored thrust into Japanese-held northern China. Germany, bound by anti-communist pacts with Japan, mobilizes in support. France and Britain declare war to protect imperial holdings. The conflict becomes global within months, yet it is fought with the tools and tactics born of 1915's premature mechanization. Blitzkrieg, perfected 2 decades early, defines the battlefield. German panzer divisions, equipped with sloped armor successors to Vickers designs, diesel engines, and long-barreled 75mm guns, sweep through Poland and Ukraine in weeks, encircling Soviet armies before winter sets in. Russian T-34 analogs, mass-produced since the 1930s, counterattack in vast steppe battles reminiscent of Kursk but on an even grander scale. Casualties mount rapidly, mobile warfare spares no one when breakthroughs fail to achieve decision. In North Africa, British Matilda II heavies clash with Italian light tanks across Libyan deserts, while Japanese Type 97 mediums overrun Singapore in days. Naval warfare evolves alongside. Aircraft carriers, developed from 1920s experiments, dominate oceans. The Battle of the Coral Sea in 1943 sees hundreds of dive bombers sink entire fleets in hours. Strategic bombing remains limited. Air forces prioritize tactical support for armored spearheads. Atomic research, accelerated by wartime urgency but starting from a higher industrial base, yields the first bomb in 1947. The U.S., entering late after Japanese attacks on the Philippines, drops devices on Hiroshima and Nagasaki equivalents in Manchuria, forcing Tokyo's surrender. Germany, facing relentless Allied tank offensives across the Rhine, capitulates in spring 1948 after Berlin is encircled by combined Anglo-French-American armored corps. The post-war order emerges exhausted but intact. Europe divides not into ideological blocs but great power spheres, a neutral, social democratic Germany buffered between French influence in the West and a republican Russia in the East. Colonial empires dissolve gradually through negotiated independence, India in 1952, Indonesia in 1954, most of Africa by 1965, sparing the violent partitions of our timeline. The United Nations, founded in 1949 with stronger enforcement mechanisms born of mechanized horror, outlaws offensive tank deployments beyond defensive quotas. Technologically, the Twin Wars propel humanity forward. Jet aircraft enter civilian service by 1955, interstate highways, first built for military logistics, crisscross continents. Computing, driven by code-breaking and fire control needs, births programmable machines in the 1950s. Space becomes the new frontier earlier, a joint Franco-British orbital station launches in 1965, followed by American and Russian lunar bases by 1975. In our present day of December 2025, this alternate world stands wealthier, more interconnected, yet haunted by the specter of mobility. Global population exceeds 9 billion, bolstered by lives spared in 1915 to 1917. Climate accords, forged in the 1970s amid fears of industrialized destruction, cap emissions decades ahead of our schedule. Cultural conservatism lingers longer, monarchies persist in Britain and several successor states, but democratic norms prevail. Anti-Semitism and racial ideologies, deprived of fertile post-1918 soil, fade into historical footnotes. One decision to rush tanks into battle in 1915 shortened the Great War, saved millions, and inadvertently armed the world for a shorter, sharper second cataclysm. The butterfly effect teaches us that technological salvation in one era often becomes the seed of greater peril in the next. Tanks broke the stalemate of 1915, only to prove that war, once mechanized, could never again be contained by human endurance alone. Thank you for joining this journey through a world where steel monsters ended the trenches early, and reshaped the century in ways both brighter and more perilous than our own. What other forgotten inventions might have rewritten history's bloodiest chapters?